Imagine this. Tomorrow morning, every clock on Earth suddenly freezes. Your phone, your watch, the world's stock markets, even the countdown on a rocket about to launch, all stuck on the same exact second. And yet, your heart is still beating. Your thoughts are still racing. You are still moving inside a world where, apparently, time has stopped. Here's the disturbing part. For your brain, that's not very different from what's already happening. We grow up believing time is a river, carrying us from childhood to old age, from first love to final goodbye. But modern physics, neuroscience, and philosophy are all hinting at something far stranger. That there may be no flow out there at all, only a universe of fixed moments and a mind sliding across them, frame by frame. In this video, we're going to ask a dangerous question. What if time doesn't flow, only we do? Why does a satellite's clock tick differently from the one on your wrist? Why is your brain always living a few hundred milliseconds in the past? And why do some scientists and philosophers think past, present, and future might exist all at once? If that's true, then maybe time isn't what's moving. Maybe you are. If time is not the thing moving, then the first place to look is the one place that refuses to hold still. The feeling you are having right now that something is slipping away from you, even as you listen. You feel it most clearly in moments that are supposed to be shared milestones. Imagine standing in a crowded street on the last night of the year. The sky is heavy with smoke and light. People around you are shouting their way through the final seconds before midnight, voices stacking on top of each other. There is music, laughter, the smell of alcohol and fireworks. Someone begins the count, and without thinking, you join in. Each number feels like a floor dropping away under your feet. With every word you say, you are convinced that a slice of reality has just fallen behind you forever. Now shift to a hospital corridor. The same clock on the wall, the same slow sweep of the second hand, but a different kind of waiting. There is a door you are not allowed to open. Someone you love is on the other side, under harsh lights and cold metal instruments. You stare at the clock, and this time, each second does not fall away. It stretches. The space between ticks feels swollen, almost elastic. You might look away for a moment, look back, and feel offended that the hand has moved so little. You do not say, "My body is moving slowly," or "My thoughts are stretching." You say, "Time is dragging." In both scenes, your language places time outside of you. Time is what speeds up or slows down. You are just there, subjected to it. You say time flies when you are happy. You say time stands still when something shocks you. You say you are running out of time, as if it were a fuel that lives somewhere beyond your skin, draining away while you scramble to use what is left. These are metaphors, but they are not just figures of speech. A metaphor is when we talk about one thing as if it were another, to make it feel concrete. Here, time has become a substance, a river, a resource, a thing that moves toward us, past us, away from us. Stories deepen this habit. Think about how many films treat time like a landscape you can walk across. A character steps into a magic closet, climbs into a machine, or enters a glowing doorway, and suddenly they are back in time or ahead of time, as if the past and future were just neighborhoods along a road. A film like About Time takes this image literally. The main character can travel to earlier episodes of his life, re-enter them, and change what happens. The underlying assumption is quiet, but powerful. There is a real timeline outside you, already flowing, and your personal story is simply one path through it. You can swim along with the current, or, if you are special enough, you can swim against it. But step away from the screen for a moment. Strip away the music, the special effects, the narrative voice. If you stop using the word time at all and simply look at what is happening, what do you actually see? You see bodies moving, expressions changing, light shifting on the floor as the sun drifts across the sky. You feel your heart beating, your breath going in and out, your thoughts appearing and dissolving. You see people leave and return, objects fall and break, flowers open and wither. Everything is changing, but you never see time itself doing anything. You never catch the river in the act. Even as children, we are trained to reverse this. We are told that days pass, that we are in the year as if it were a room, that we are moving into the future. We learn the names of days and months. We color in calendars. We sing songs about yesterday and tomorrow. Slowly, the brain learns to treat these labels as if they were part of the physical world. A calendar is not just a tool for tracking patterns of sunlight and seasons. It becomes an invisible grid that we imagine lying under everything that happens, like graph paper under a drawing. When a birthday comes, you say, "Another year has gone by." Not, "The Earth has completed another orbit, and my body has changed slightly." Notice how rarely we describe what is actually there. We could say, "My body is decaying at this rate." We could say, "The people around me are changing." We could say, "The configuration of matter I call my life is shifting." Instead, we say, "Time is passing." In that move, we have taken responsibility for change and handed it to an abstraction. Change is now something that is done to us, not something that is happening in and through us. Emotion sharpens this illusion. When you are afraid, your body floods with signals, heart pounding, muscles tense, attention narrowed. The brain is in survival mode, tracking every tiny motion around you. Those moments feel stretched, not because some cosmic clock has slowed, but because your internal recording has become denser. You lay down more memory per physical second. Later, when you recall the event, there is simply more detail to move through, so it feels like it lasted longer. The opposite happens in routine. A week of identical commutes collapses in retrospect into a few blurry snapshots. Your memory has few markers, so your story of that week compresses into almost nothing, and you say, "Those days just flew by." The brain does not log time like a machine that stamps each instant with a precise tag. It cares about significance, not uniform intervals. A day that contains a first kiss, a shocking loss, or an unexpected revelation will be filled with dense memory traces. A day that mirrors the one before it will leave almost no trace at all. When you look back, you do not feel the raw duration. You feel the density of remembered change. Yet in conversation, you will almost always describe this difference as a property of time, not of memory. "It was the longest day of my life. The year disappeared." Once you start watching your own speech, it becomes almost unsettling. Time leaks into every metaphor. You spend time. You waste time. You save time. You invest time. These are all economic verbs, suggesting that time is a currency you can hold, lose, or exchange. But nothing in physics behaves quite like that. What you actually have is a limited capacity for attention and action in a universe where changes keep unfolding. When you lose time, you have really lost track of your own changing state, not chunks of some external substance. This is not to say that time is unreal or that we should simply stop using the word. The point is quieter. Our everyday sense that time is something flowing over us is built, layer by layer, out of habits of language, patterns of memory, and emotional contrasts. None of these are direct measurements of a fundamental river passing by. They are closer to a compressed summary of how much and how intensely things have changed for us lately. If you peel those layers back, what remains is simpler and more brutal. There is a world in which configurations of matter and energy keep shifting according to certain regularities. There is a brain inside that world, drawing boundaries, naming stretches of change, hours and years, assigning meaning to certain transitions and ignoring others. There is a story that brain tells itself, in which it is a character being carried forward by time. That story feels natural. It feels inevitable. But feeling something as a flow does not prove that there is a current outside you. The sense that time is moving may be nothing more than the way a nervous system summarizes change filtered through language and emotion. It is a powerful story, and it has kept us oriented for as long as we have been telling it. But if we want to know whether time itself is really flowing, we will have to look beyond how it feels and start paying attention to what is actually changing and why. When you stop trusting the story of time and look instead at the rearranging of matter, you notice something simple and stubborn. Certain changes are common in one direction and practically non-existent in the other. You can see this in a kitchen. Your hand brushes a cup on the edge of the counter. It tilts, slips, and falls. There is a brief, helpless moment when nothing can be done. The cup hits the floor and shatters. Fragments scatter. Coffee explodes outward in a chaotic splash. Whether you watch it live or in slow motion, you have no doubt about which way the event is unfolding. If someone showed you a video of the shards lifting themselves, the puddle leaping up, the pieces knitting together into a flawless cup that lands gently back on the counter, you would know instantly that they had pressed play in reverse. That certainty is strange. The basic laws we use to describe particles do not carry little arrows saying, "This is the past," and "This is the future." If you had the exact positions and motions of all the tiny parts before the cup fell, the equations would let you run the situation forward or backward without favoring either direction. Yet your intuition is ruthless. A falling cup feels normal. A rising one feels impossible. Somewhere between the microscopic description and your everyday experience, a direction appears. The name we give to this direction is linked to a specific quantity: entropy. The word sounds heavy, almost mystical, but the idea behind it is not supernatural. When physicists talk about entropy in this context, they are talking about how many different microscopic arrangements of things produce the same macroscopic state. A neatly stacked tower of blocks, all aligned, corresponds to a very small number of specific arrangements. A messy heap on the floor corresponds to a huge number of arrangements. Both are made of the same blocks, but one configuration is special and rare, the other is generic and easy to get. Think of your room just after you have cleaned it. Every object has a clear place. The bed is made. The desk is clear. The floor is empty. There are many ways for this order to be disturbed. You can drop clothes on the chair, leave books scattered on the floor, let cups and plates accumulate on the table. With almost no effort, the room drifts toward a state where things are spread out, mixed, and disorganized. For the room to move in the other direction without your intervention, socks would have to crawl back into drawers, books would have to stack themselves in a neat line, dust would have to leave surfaces on its own. Nothing in the fundamental laws forbids that. But the chance of all the random motions aligning perfectly that way is so tiny that you will never see it. Entropy is a way of measuring this tilt in possibilities. Low entropy means a state that is orderly, specific, and relatively unlikely if things were arranged at random. High entropy means a state that can be realized in many ways, where details are smeared out. Left alone, systems made of many parts tend to wander from low entropy to high entropy simply because there are more ways to be messy than to be neat. If you imagine tossing a deck of cards into the air and letting them land, you understand the idea by instinct. It is extraordinarily unlikely that they will return to a perfectly sorted order, not because the air refuses to cooperate, but because the immense majority of arrangements look shuffled. The broken cup on the floor has higher entropy than the intact cup on the counter. The pile of rubble has higher entropy than the carefully designed building it used to be. In principle, every atom in that rubble could move in just the right way to rebuild the structure brick by brick, restore the wiring, repaint the walls, and place every piece of furniture exactly where it once was. In practice, the system of tiny particles has far, far more ways to remain a ruin than to become a home again. So you mark the date when the building opened, and you mark the date when it collapsed. but you never leave a blank space in your calendar labeled Day of Spontaneous Reconstruction. This is what people mean when they speak about an arrow of time. It is not a mystical force pushing events forward. It is the statistical tendency for the universe to move from special, low-entropy states to ordinary, high-entropy ones. When you look at a photograph, there are clues that let you guess which side is before and which is after. Intact glass versus scattered shards. Smoke rising versus smoke already dispersed. An untouched candle versus wax pooled around a burnt wick. The direction in which entropy increases is the direction you call the future. There is a subtle difference between this arrow and the flowing time we think we feel. The statement that entropy increases is a statement about patterns in large systems, averaged over countless small events. It does not say anything about how fast you experience those changes or whether your awareness rides them like a current. It does not introduce a special, moving present that sweeps across the universe. It simply tells you that if you compare two snapshots of a closed system, the one with higher entropy is overwhelmingly likely to be the later one. It is tempting to take this one step too far, to say, entropy increases, therefore time flows. But the direction of increasing entropy might be more like an orientation painted on the fabric of reality than a motion of the fabric itself. Imagine a map where north and south are marked. The markings tell you which way is which. They do not force the map to move in any direction. Objects on the map can travel north or south, but the grid of directions is not going anywhere. In the same way, entropy gives a consistent way to separate what you call the past from what you call the future, without claiming that time as a substance is moving. At a microscopic level, the gap becomes even more pronounced. The fundamental equations of motion for many physical theories look almost indifferent to the distinction between earlier and later. If you reverse the momenta of all particles in a system, the equations happily trace a path back to the low entropy state. They do not collapse. They simply describe a different history. The asymmetry you observe in daily life comes from boundary conditions. The universe, for reasons still debated, seems to have started in an unusually low entropy state. Given that improbable beginning, almost everything that follows will be a drift toward higher entropy. The way a drop of ink released in clear water will spread, not gather. There is an echo of this in very familiar experiences. A hot drink left on a table cools to match the room. Heat, which at the microscopic level is just disordered motion of particles, spreads out. The reverse, a cold drink spontaneously drawing warmth from the air to become hotter than its surroundings without any input of energy, does not occur. Again, nothing in the basic equations forbids the tiny motions from aligning just right to make the drink hotter. It is simply so extraordinarily unlikely that for all practical purposes, you can treat it as impossible. The arrow you feel when you say, "My coffee is getting cold," is this statistical tilt in action. Entropy is not just about mess. It is about information. To specify a low entropy state, you must give a lot of detailed information. Where each piece is, how each element is arranged. To specify a high entropy state, you need much less detail. The cup is shattered and scattered, covers countless microscopic configurations. So when entropy increases, information about the precise past arrangement is effectively smeared out. It is still, in principle, encoded in the positions and motions of all the particles. But for any realistic observer, that information is gone. You can tell that something broke, burned, decayed. You cannot reconstruct every path that led there. This loss of accessible information is tied to your sense that the past is fixed and the future is open. You can see the remains of what has already happened in the patterns of high entropy around you: ashes, ruins, wrinkles, worn surfaces. You can read hints of the past in them, but you cannot change them. The future, on the other hand, is a fan of possibilities constrained by those same patterns. Entropy's increase does not tell you which specific path will be taken, only that whichever path is taken will almost surely involve more spreading, more mixing, more smearing of detail. If you combine these perspectives, a slightly unsettling picture emerges. What you call the flow of time may be, at the physical level, the unfolding of a universe from a low entropy beginning toward higher entropy configurations, according to equations that themselves do not favor a direction. The arrow is not an extra ingredient added on top of the laws. It is a large-scale consequence of starting in a special state. Against that backdrop, your awareness tracks certain changes, constructs narratives, and labels one side of the gradient before and the other side after. This does not yet tell you whether time as a dimension is fixed, like a block, or whether new moments are being created as entropy climbs. It does not settle whether there is a moving present. It only shows that, long before consciousness and memory have their say, the material world already carries an asymmetry. Cups break and do not reassemble. Buildings collapse and do not leap back into the sky. Heat spreads, structures decay. It is easy to mistake this irreversible drift for a river of time flowing forward, to feel yourself carried along with it. But if you resist the urge to personify time and focus instead on the patterns of change, the arrow begins to look less like a current and more like a gradient into which everything is falling. Whether there is a deeper sense in which all moments already exist, or only the present is real, is not decided by entropy alone. It simply marks, with quiet consistency, which side of any event you are allowed to remember and which side you are left to imagine. The line between what you can remember and what you can only imagine feels sharp and universal, as if the whole cosmos agreed with you about which side is which. But the moment you ask how the universe itself keeps time, that confidence quietly starts to fall apart. For a long stretch of our history, the picture was simple. Time was imagined as a single, invisible rhythm beating everywhere at once. A grand cosmic clock, ticking in perfect unison from the center of the universe to the edge, from your bedroom to a distant star. Space was where events happened. Time was when they happened. Both were absolute. If two things occurred at the same time, then that statement was supposed to be true for everyone, everywhere, no matter how they moved. This picture is comforting. It lets you imagine that there is a shared now sweeping across reality, like a perfectly straight line, right now. Somewhere, a child is being born. A star is collapsing. A future version of you is doing something you cannot yet see. All of these are stitched together by a single, universal, present moment. You might not know what is happening in that shared now, but you trust that it exists. Modern physics does not share that trust. In the early years of the 20th century, a shift began with a simple, stubborn observation about light. No matter how you move, if you measure the speed of light in empty space, you get the same answer. You can run toward the beam or away from it, fire it from a moving train or a stationary lab, and the result does not adjust to make you feel better. It stays fixed. The universe refuses to treat your motion as special. If you hold on to the old idea of absolute time, this is intolerable. In that picture, velocities are supposed to add up in an intuitive way. If you throw a ball forward on a moving train, someone standing on the platform will see the ball's speed as the sum of the train's speed and the ball's speed. Light does not play by that rule. To protect this stubborn behavior of light, something else has to give. What bends is not the speed of the beam, but your assumptions about time and space. Imagine a long train moving smoothly along straight tracks. A storm rolls in. At a particular instant, two flashes of lightning strike the front and the back of the train. An observer standing on the platform in the middle between those points sees the light from both strikes reach them at the same moment. For them, the conclusion is obvious. The lightning bolts were simultaneous. The front and the back were hit at the same time. Now place another observer inside the train, standing at its center. As the bolts hit, the train is moving forward. The light from the strike at the front has to chase the moving observer. The light from the strike at the back is racing toward them. Because the speed of light is the same in all directions, the pulses do not arrive together. The one from the front reaches the observer later. From their point of view, the strike at the back happened first. There is no higher judge who can declare one of them correct and the other mistaken. Each is using the same laws of physics, and the same constant speed of light. The discrepancy is not an error in perception. It is built into the structure of space-time. Two events that are simultaneous in one frame of motion are not simultaneous in another. The claim, "these things happened at the same time," is no longer absolute. It depends on how you are moving. This is the first quiet death of absolute time. There is no single cosmic slicing of events into past, present, and future that all observers must agree on. Instead, each possible state of motion comes with its own way of drawing a now line through the fabric of space-time. Change your velocity. Change your slice. What you regard as the present is, for someone moving differently, a mixture of what you call past and future. To see how radical this is, stretch the picture to a larger scale. Imagine you are on Earth, looking up at a distant star. You might be tempted to say, right now, on that star, something is happening. Perhaps storms are raging on its surface. Perhaps a civilization, if one exists, is watching its own sky. The phrase "right now" feels innocent. But in the light of relativity, it hides a problem. The notion of "at the same time as this moment on Earth" is not well defined across vast distances. Different observers, moving differently, will draw different horizontal slices of space-time, connecting events on Earth with events on that star. There is no single, privileged way to stretch a present moment across the universe. The consequences show up even in thought experiments about travel. Picture a pair of twins. One stays on Earth. The other climbs into a spacecraft, accelerates to a speed close to that of light, travels for a while, turns around, and comes back. When they reunite, the traveling twin has aged less. Their heart has beaten fewer times. Fewer birthdays have passed for them than for the twin who stayed home. This is not a trick of biology. It is not an illusion caused by motion sickness or faulty clocks. It is the direct result of how space-time is structured. Each twin has followed a different path through space-time, and along each path, there is a quantity called proper time that measures the duration experienced by that traveler. Those durations are not guaranteed to match. In this scenario, the path with high speed and sharp accelerations simply contains less proper time between departure and reunion than the quiet path of staying at home. Again, there is no external master clock that can step in and correct them. No universal standard can say, "You are both wrong, here is the real amount of time that has passed." Each clock, each heartbeat, each aging body is tracing out its own measure of duration along its world line. Time, in this sense, has become local. It attaches to paths, not to a global background. What falls away here is the comfort of a shared timeline. The idea that the universe is a stage on which every actor moves forward in lockstep, guided by a single hidden metronome, simply does not fit the evidence. Instead, what exists is four-dimensional space-time. 3 dimensions of space interwoven with 1 dimension of time, forming a geometric structure. Motion through this structure changes how you slice it into space and time. Different motions expose different cross-sections, like cutting the same loaf of bread at different angles. From inside your daily life, this can be hard to feel. Your speeds are slow compared to light. The gravitational fields you move through are modest. The differences in time between your head and your feet, between your bed and your kitchen, are tiny. For practical purposes, you and the people around you can pretend that there is one shared now. Your phones will still ring in unison. All the clocks in your house can be set to the same reading. But the deeper structure is indifferent to these conveniences. A satellite in orbit around Earth experiences time at a slightly different rate than a clock on the ground. A particle racing through an accelerator can live far longer in the lab frame than it would if it were at rest. Massive objects warp the geometry of space-time, slowing down the passage of proper time near them, compared with regions farther away. What you casually call 1 second is not a uniform slice of the universe. It is the reading of a particular clock along a particular path, shaped by motion and gravity. So the picture that emerges is this. Time is not a universal river with a single current. It is more like a network of local streams, each attached to a world line, each flowing according to the same underlying rules but not synchronized by any global decree. When you say now, you are naming a point on your own stream, and, by convention, associating it with nearby points on other streams. As distances grow and motions differ, that convention breaks down. This does not answer the question of whether time, as a dimension, is fully laid out in a static block, or whether there is some sense in which new moments come into being. Relativity does not tell you what it feels like to move from event to event. It does not explain why there is any experience of passage at all. It only insists that if you think of time as a single, absolute, universal quantity that ticks the same way for everyone, you will be wrong. The death of absolute time leaves a hollow space where the old cosmic clock used to sit. Into that space, other images will try to move. A block universe in which all events simply coexist. A relational view in which time is nothing over and above the changing relations between things. A picture in which the only meaningful durations are those traced by conscious beings. Before you explore those possibilities, it is worth letting the loss sink in. There is no master timeline keeping score behind the scenes. There is no single present moment that the entire universe shares. There are only events, arranged in a four-dimensional structure, and countless local measures of before and after drawn from within it. Whatever flows, if anything does, is not the background against which these events sit. It will have to be something moving inside that structure. Something that reads the pattern and calls one slice now. I have really offending for stalls. If there is something that reads the pattern and calls one slice now, then the pattern itself must already be there to be read. One way of taking that seriously is to imagine that the universe is not unfolding in time at all, but sitting there, complete, like a finished object. Physicists sometimes draw spacetime on a diagram. Horizontal axis for space, a vertical axis for time. A single event, like you taking a breath, is a dot on this diagram. Your life becomes a long, thin thread, weaving upward through the chart as you move and age. Every person, every planet, every photon of light has its own line. The entire history of the universe is a web of these lines, all intersecting and diverging. On the page, nothing flows. Nothing is being generated. It is all already there, from what you call the beginning to what you call the end. Of course, the universe is not really a sheet of paper, but the picture suggests a way of thinking. Instead of imagining a three-dimensional world that exists at one moment, then at the next, and the next, you can imagine a four-dimensional space-time block that simply exists. In this block, what you call past, present, and future are just different regions, the way early chapters and later chapters in a book are different pages. The story has an order, but it does not grow in front of your eyes. You grow through it. Stories are useful here because you already know the difference between being inside a narrative and outside it. Think of a graphic novel or a long comic. For the character drawn in the panels, experience is linear. The character is surprised by events, learns new facts, ages, loses, changes. If you could step into their consciousness, you would feel time flowing. First this panel, then that one. But as the reader, you hold all the pages at once. You can flip to the ending, dwell on the opening, or scan the middle. The entire arc, from first frame to last, exists together in your hands. The block universe view says that reality might be more like the book in your hands than the panel you happen to be reading. Every event, from the formation of galaxies to the movement of your eyes across these words, is a point in a four-dimensional structure. The order of these points is not imposed by a moving present. It is encoded in the geometry itself, in the relations between events. To say that one event happens after another is to say that one lies to the future side of the other in space-time, not that some cosmic production line has stamped it into existence later. This sounds abstract until you connect it with the loss of absolute time. In a block picture, Different observers with different motions are like different ways of slicing the same solid object. Imagine a loaf of bread with swirls of color running through it. One person cuts the loaf straight across, making slices that show one pattern. Another cuts at a diagonal, and their slices show a different pattern of swirls. Neither is wrong. They are just taking different cross-sections of the same thing. In relativity, there is no privileged way to slice space-time into space plus time. Different motions reveal different cross-sections. The underlying block is what stays the same. From within your own life, this is almost impossible to feel directly. You experience yourself as moving from earlier to later, accumulating memories as you go. The block universe suggestion is that what you experience as motion along a timeline is, at a deeper level, a traversal of a fixed structure. All of your experiences, from first to last, are there as points on your world line. What changes is not which events exist, but which event your consciousness is currently at. A life friend sliced in the people. Science fiction often plays with this idea, sometimes more honestly than our everyday language does. In one well-known film, a linguist encounters a language that does not arrange events in a simple before and after sequence. As she internalizes this language, her experience of time begins to shift. Scenes from what she would have called her future appear in her awareness with the same immediacy as scenes from her past. Her life stops feeling like a line being extended and starts feeling like a shape that can be seen from multiple angles. In the film, this is framed as a kind of gift or curse, but underneath the narrative there is a philosophical point. If the universe is block-like, then there is no deep metaphysical distinction between the event you are remembering and the event you will eventually live. Both are equally real slices of the same four-dimensional structure. The only distinction is that one has already been traversed by your consciousness and the other has not. You can bring this closer to home with a quieter example. Picture a mother sitting by a window at night. She has lived long enough to hold two kinds of knowledge at once. She remembers the day her child was born, the weight of a small body in her arms, the smell of hospital air, the sense that an entire future had just opened. She also, now, knows the date on which that child will leave home, or perhaps the date on which some decisive break in their relationship will occur. These two moments feel very different from within the flow of life. One is bathed in possibility, the other in loss. Yet when she sits alone with her thoughts, she can hold both in one mind. She can see the arc between them as a single shape, like tracing a curve from its beginning to its end. From that vantage point, the timeline of her relationship with her child becomes almost like a small block within the larger block of her life. She has not escaped time, but she has stepped, briefly, into a perspective where multiple points on the line are present together in imagination. The block universe view extends this intuition beyond imagination. It suggests that, in the actual structure of reality, every such point is there, in a similar way, independent of whether any being is currently thinking about it. The party you will attend in 10 years, if you live that long, is not a vague cloud of potential hovering in non-existence, waiting to be created. It is a specific region of space-time, just as fixed as this moment is. You simply have not reached it along your world line. This kind of picture is often called eternalist. It does not mean that individual things within the block are immortal. Stars still burn out. Bodies still decay. Relationships still end. It means that the events of burning out, decaying, ending are all included in the complete space-time structure. Nothing is being added or removed. There is no process of becoming at the level of the block. There is only being. If you let this sink in, it does something strange to common phrases. When you say that event is in my future, in a block view, what you really mean is, the event lies to the future along my world line in space-time. When you say, the past is gone, you are describing how your experience of it is limited, not claiming that the events themselves have fallen into nothingness. Those events are still there in the block, exactly where they always were. You simply no longer occupy those coordinates. This does not give you magical access to them. You cannot physically step back into your childhood any more than a character on page 20 can teleport to page 3. The book exists as a whole, but characters do not have the perspective of the reader. In the same way, if the universe is block-like, you, as a finite being embedded in it, experience only one moment at a time, with memory providing a slender bridge to the parts you have already traversed and imagination trying to sketch the parts you have not. There is a tension here. Your deepest intuitions tell you that the past is fixed, the present is real, and the future is open. The block universe flattens that distinction. From the block's imagined viewpoint, all events are equally real. The difference between past and future is about where you are located and what information you have, not about which events exist. For many people, this feels like a theft. It seems to threaten free will, mystery, even meaning. If your entire life is already a line in space-time, are you really choosing or just playing out a script? There are responses to this worry. Some philosophers argue that even in a block universe, the notion of decision can be understood as part of the block. Your deliberations, your weighing of options, your eventual choice are all events within the structure. The fact that they are all laid out does not mean they are less real. It simply means that what you experience as deciding is itself one part of the overall pattern, not a force that stands outside and writes the pattern as it goes. The important point for our question about the flow of time is different. In a block universe, there is no need for time itself to move. There is no advancing present sweeping along the axis, turning future into past. The relations of before and after are built into the geometry, not updated moment by moment. Whatever has the feeling of motion, of succession, of a moving now, must be something like a trajectory within the block, not a property of the block as a whole. That trajectory might be the stream of physical processes that constitute a brain. It might be the unfolding of patterns of information. It might be something that current physics does not yet describe well. But in this view, the stage is not sliding under the actors. The stage is fixed and four-dimensional. The actors trace paths upon it. When you say time is passing, you may be like a character who feels the pages turning but cannot see that the entire book has always been there, quietly resting, beginning and ending already written, waiting only to be read. If the universe is a block already written, then whatever you experience as now can only be the place where one particular process is currently reading it. That process lives in a brain that never actually touches the present. You can feel this in small, strange ways. Look at an analog clock with a ticking second hand. Move your eyes away, then flick them back quickly. Every so often, you may notice that the second hand seems to freeze for a moment, hanging on one mark, before continuing at a normal pace. It feels as if time itself has paused, caught in the act. Of course, the mechanism did not stop. What stalled was your internal rendering of it. This effect has a name, the stopped clock illusion. One way to think about it is that when you make a rapid eye movement, your brain briefly shuts down the blurred visual input, and then, when the eyes land, it stretches the first clear image backward in time. Instead of showing you the smear of motion and then the sharp scene, it erases the smear and extends the first stable frame so that your experience feels continuous. As a result, that first frame gets an artificial extra duration. It seems to have lasted longer than it physically did. This is not a glitch in an otherwise faithful system. It is a clue about how your brain always handles time. Your nervous system never delivers reality to you. Live. Signals from your eyes, ears, skin, and inner organs all take time to travel. Light reflected from your hand hits your retina, triggers chemical changes, sends electrical pulses along nerves, and eventually reaches visual areas in the brain. Sound from a clap needs to travel through air to your ears, vibrate tiny bones, ripple fluid, bend hair cells, and trigger other pulses. From there, more processing. By the time all of this has happened, the physical events that caused the signals are already over. The delays are small in everyday terms, measured in fractions of a second, but for the brain's own operations, they are significant. If your experience tried to track each sense as it arrived, you would live in a fractured world. Light from a door slamming would be perceived before the sound, even though, in the external world, the events that generated them were tightly linked. Touch might lag behind vision. Hearing might lag behind both. Nothing would line up. Instead, your brain quietly cheats. It waits. It gathers signals over a short window of time, compares them, and only then declares, "This is what is happening now." Your conscious moment is not a single slice. It is a stitched bundle. Sights, sounds, touches, and internal feelings that arrive within a certain span are pulled together and labeled as one present. Anything that comes too far outside that span is treated as belonging to a different moment. Researchers sometimes call this span the subjective present or the specious present. It is not infinitely thin. It has a thickness, on the order of a fraction of a second for some tasks, and stretching to a few seconds for others. Within that window, the brain can flex the internal timeline more than you might like to know. If a sound arrives just after a flash of light, but still within the integration window, the brain may slide it backward in your experience so that you feel them as simultaneous. If two taps on your skin are close together, they may fuse into one sensation, or one may be pushed back in your felt sequence. You can see this at work in certain lab illusions. In one experiment, a moving object and a brief flash are presented at the same physical time and place. People often report that the moving object appears ahead of where it actually was at the moment of the flash. The brain has used the object's trajectory to predict where it will be, then retroactively adjusted the perceived position so that the story is smoother. To keep the world looking coherent, your nervous system is willing to rewrite the apparent order of events within that hidden window. The same kind of trickery shows up in your eye movements. Several times a second, your eyes jump from one point of interest to another in rapid, jerky motions called saccades. During each jump, the image on your retina sweeps across, smearing everything. If your brain showed you this raw data, the world would appear to lurch and blur constantly. Instead, for the duration of each jump, visual processing is heavily damped. Your awareness simply skips over the messy transitions and pastes stable scenes together. You never see the jumps themselves. Your experienced world is a series of carefully edited shots. Put these pieces together and a clear picture emerges. There is no inner theater receiving a real-time feed from the senses. There is a construction site. Sensory fragments arrive with delays and distortions. The brain waits just long enough to collect a useful batch, then assembles them into a best guess about what is going on now. That best guess is what you experience as the present moment. But it is always a little late, always a little smoothed, always a little reworked. You could say that you are living in a moving average of the recent past. The true razor edge, where external events are occurring, is inaccessible. By the time anything has become part of your awareness, it has already happened. The brain has also, in a sense, already made decisions about how to order and interpret it. But the story it presents to you hides its own delay. You feel as if you are standing on the frontier of time, seeing things as they are. In fact, you are standing several steps behind, watching a polished replay that has been cut for narrative coherence. This does not only apply to vision and audition. Motor decisions go through similar layers of pre-processing. In some experiments, scientists measure brain activity while a person prepares to move a hand at a moment of their choosing. A particular signal in the motor areas rises before the person reports having formed the conscious intention to move. The brain begins setting up the action, and only afterward does the feeling of, "I have decided to do this now," enter awareness. Even the moment you call the birth of a choice may be a delayed summary of deeper processes that have already unfolded. None of this means that consciousness is fake, or that you are a passive spectator trapped in a deterministic movie. It means that the conscious you is not the first to know. Your feeling of being at the cutting edge of time is an internal narrative, overlaying a more distributed, slower machinery. That machinery needs time to gather evidence, resolve conflicts, and choose a coherent interpretation. The cost of coherence is immediacy. In daily life, the system works well enough that you rarely notice its tricks. When you catch a ball, walk through a crowded street, or hold a conversation, You are relying on predictions and corrections that run ahead of conscious awareness. Your brain constantly forecasts where objects will be, how other people will move, how sounds will evolve, and it uses those forecasts to guide your actions. Incoming sensory data are compared against these expectations. When they match, you feel the world as smooth. When they fail in a dramatic way, you feel surprise, shock, or the sense that time has momentarily stretched or snapped. Think about how you experience a near accident on the road. In the moment, everything seems to slow down. You notice details you would normally ignore. The texture of the steering wheel under your fingers, the angle of a car's headlights, the expression on a passerby's face. Later, when you recall it, the sequence feels long and stretched, but the actual external events unfolded over a brief interval. What changed was the intensity of processing. The brain allocated more resources, recorded more snapshots, wrote a thicker file. When you play that file back, it takes more subjective time to traverse, so the event feels as if it lasted longer. The inverse happens in boredom or routine. When every day in a week follows the same pattern, your brain compresses. It does not waste storage on repeated scenes. It keeps a few representative frames and discards the rest. In the moment, each day may feel slow, but when you look back, that entire span collapses. You have little to anchor your memory, so the period feels thin. Again, it is not that time itself has sped up or slowed down. It is that the number and density of recorded changes fluctuate. Your inner clock runs on content, not on absolute seconds. Seen against the backdrop of the block universe idea, all of this takes on another layer of meaning. If there really is a four-dimensional spacetime containing all events, then your brain is not only late to the external present, it is also extremely selective about which parts of the block it samples and how it stitches them. The window that you call now is a local, adaptive construction floating over a fixed structure. You do not see the block. You see a moving, reedited summary that allows a biological organism to survive. The unsettling conclusion is that there is no single, precise instant you can point to and say, "That is my present." There is only a rolling horizon of processed past, held together by neural mechanisms that blur and reorder events in the service of continuity. Your awareness rides this horizon as it glides along your world line, always slightly delayed, always smoothed, always translated into a story. So when you feel time flowing, part of what you are feeling may not be a flow out there at all, but the momentum of this internal construction. A brain that can never reach the true present claims a small region of the recent past as its now, edits it into something it can handle, and then moves on. The river, if there is one, may not be time. It may be this act of continual reconstruction, forever chasing a reality that has already slipped by. But reconstruction alone is not enough to feel a current. A river needs banks, something on one side called what has already happened, and something on the other called what might happen next. That division is built from memory and prediction. Imagine you are driving at night on a wet road. The white lines on the asphalt slide past in a steady rhythm. The red lights of the car ahead of you hover in your field of view, shifting slightly left and right. If you were only reacting to the exact sensory snapshot of this instant, you would already be too late. By the time you noticed the brake lights, processed their meaning, and moved your foot, you would have crashed. What saves you is that your brain is not living in this instant alone. It is carrying at least two extra layers at all times. One layer is memory, a record of how the car ahead was moving just moments ago, how quickly you have been approaching it, how the road has been curving. The other is prediction, a crude simulation of where that car will probably be a few heartbeats from now, how your own hands will adjust, how the road might bend beyond the reach of your headlights. The feeling of a continuous flow while you drive comes from your brain constantly comparing these layers. It checks, does what I am seeing now fit what my memory says was happening and what my prediction says should happen next? When all three line up, the world feels smooth. When they diverge, you feel a jolt. Time, in that sense, is not something you are passively moving through. It is something you are actively stitching from traces and guesses. Inside your head, this stitching machine is remarkably economical. It does not record everything. It cannot. There is simply too much information arriving every moment. So it chooses. It tags certain events as worth storing with detail and others as noise that can be discarded. It also does something more subtle. It compresses. Rather than keeping a full reel of every moment, it tends to save summaries and keyframes. You can feel this in the way you think about an ordinary work week. Day by day, the hours might feel long. You wake, commute, sit at a screen, speak to a few familiar faces, return home, scroll, sleep. There are clocks on walls, timestamps on emails, reminders chiming at fixed intervals. It all seems very structured, very measured, but when you look back at the week from a little distance, it collapses. Instead of a thick, detailed memory, you get a thin outline. The start of the week, maybe one conversation that stood out, a moment of irritation, one evening that felt slightly different. The rest blurs into a single mood. Something interesting has happened here. Physically, the duration of that week is the same as any other. The Earth rotated a certain number of times. Your heart beat so many thousands of times, but in memory, the week contains very few distinct markers. Your brain has compressed it down to a few tokens. When you replay that compressed record, it takes very little subjective time to run through, so the week feels as if it went by quickly. The flow was not fast in the world. The flow was sparse in your memory. Now contrast that with a week in which something major happens. A breakup, an accident, a sudden change in your life. During those days, your brain records much more. Every room, every conversation, every tiny decision feels charged. You will later be able to recall specific details, what you were wearing, the taste of a meal, the angle of light through a window. When, weeks or years later, you revisit that period in your mind, it is thick with information. Moving through it in memory takes time. It feels long, sometimes unbearably so. Again, the external duration was the same. What changed was the density of stored frames. What you are calling the passage of time in these cases is deeply entangled with how your brain compresses and expands experience. When you say, "that month disappeared," you are noticing that your internal record of it is thin. When you say, "those days dragged on forever," you are noticing that the record is dense. The external world does not speed up or slow down in moral sympathy with your struggles or your boredom. Your narrative bandwidth does. Prediction plays a similar trick on the future side. Think about the way you worry. When you are anxious about an upcoming exam, an interview, a conversation, your mind generates scene after scene of what might happen. You imagine answering a question badly, stumbling over a phrase, being judged. You feel the knot in your stomach tighten long before any of it takes place. These simulations are not neutral. They come with emotional tags, bodily reactions, subtle physical adjustments. In a sense, your brain is pre-living a range of possible futures. Many of them will never occur, but they still take up space in your inner timeline. They give you a sense that something is already unfolding ahead of you, that you are already in contact with events that have not happened. The more vividly you imagine them, the more real they feel. When the actual moment arrives, it may seem strangely familiar, as if you have been walking toward it for a long time. The future, as far as your experience is concerned, began not when events occurred in the external world, but when your brain started rehearsing them. There is another twist. The same networks in the brain that activate when you recall a memory also tend to activate when you imagine a future scenario. From the inside, remembering and anticipating can feel almost the same. The images have a different label. That is all. This happened versus this might happen. The timeline you walk along internally is built by pulling from both sources, past traces and future sketches, and arranging them into a continuous story about a self moving through time. This is why certain dramatic moments feel as if they contain more than one direction at once. In a near accident, people sometimes report that their whole life flashed before their eyes. It is not that the universe slowed down to let them watch a movie of their past. A more grounded interpretation is that the brain, jolted by extreme danger, rapidly activates a flood of strongly encoded memories and possible outcomes at once. The effect is a subjective burst of expanded time. In a few external seconds, you experience a dense cascade of internal events. Afterward, you might say, time slowed down. But if you look closely, what you really mean is that your inner movie suddenly had more frames per external second. The stitching machine turned its speed and resolution up as far as it could go, then returned to a lower setting once the danger had passed. The river did not change its speed. The camera changed its frame rate. There are quieter versions of this everywhere. When you fall deeply into creative work, a craft, or a conversation, you may look up and be startled at the clock. Hours have passed. You swear it has only been a short time. It is tempting to say, once again, that time flew. But in those periods, your attention was so fully engaged in the immediate sequence of actions that you did not keep tagging moments with explicit temporal markers. You were not constantly checking where you were on some internal schedule. The usually loud narration of now, then, later fell silent. The result, in hindsight, is a stretch that feels thin and light. The work may be rich, but the time around it feels almost absent. Routine does something similar on a larger scale. Years built from the same kind of days compress into a single line in memory. Those were my school years. That was when I worked at that office. That was the period I lived in that city. You know, abstractly, that there were countless mornings, meals, and nights packed into those spans. But they retreat into a background haze. The scenes you can actually replay are few. The rest exists as implied time, like pages you know are in the book but rarely reread. If you step back and look at this pattern, a slightly uncomfortable thought emerges. The continuous flow you feel is not a direct report from the universe. It is the running commentary of a system that is constantly aligning three things: a compressed record of what has been, a constructed snapshot of what seems to be, and a cloud of simulated possibilities about what could be next. When these three align smoothly, you feel a calm, steady passage of time. When they misalign, you feel time distort. A week thick with new experiences, a year of upheaval, a moment of crisis, a stretch of numbing repetition. These are not changes in the speed of time, but changes in how your memory and prediction engines allocate their resources. You might say that time feels like it is flowing because your mind is constantly stepping from one stitched composite to the next, dragging a tale of selected past and a head of imagined future along with it. In a universe that may already be laid out as a block, this has a particular flavor. You are not surfing a wave of time as it rolls forward. You are moving your point of view across a structure. And as you move, your brain is busy editing what lies behind and ahead into a single, narratable river. The flow is not in the block. The flow is in the act of narrating. If the flow is in the act of narrating, then the narrator itself is always working with old material, like a news broadcast that can never quite catch up to the event it describes. Consciousness, as far as we can tell, lives in the past. You can test this with something as simple as a clap. Bring your hands together and notice what you experience. You see your hands moving. You feel the impact. You hear the sharp crack of sound in the room. All of it feels tightly bound into one moment you call now. But each of these signals has taken a different route at a different speed. Light reflected from your skin reaches your eyes quickly, then travels through layers of retina and nerve, then into visual areas of the brain. Vibrations in the air travel more slowly, set tiny bones and fluids in motion, trigger hair cells, then climb auditory pathways. Touch signals crawl along nerves from your fingers to your spine and into somatosensory regions. By the time all of those pathways have done their work, the physical clap is already over. The air has stopped vibrating in that particular pattern. Your skin has already rebounded. Your muscles have started to relax. What you call the present moment is a blended echo of events that have already finished. Yet the brain presents them to you as if they were happening right now, aligned and fused. To manage this, it waits. It does not hand you each signal as soon as it arrives. It collects fragments over a short span, compares them, and then constructs a coherent scene. Only when the scene is ready does it let that scene surface as experience. Consciousness is not a live feed. It is a delayed broadcast, cleaned up for continuity. This delay is not huge on human scales, but it is large compared to the speed at which your neurons communicate with each other. In the time it takes for one conscious moment to coalesce, many rounds of unconscious processing have already run. Networks deep in the brain have already predicted, corrected, and sometimes overridden the raw input. By the time you become aware of a sound, a shape, a decision, the machinery that produced that awareness has finished its immediate work and moved on. Psychologists and neuroscientists have spent years probing these lags with carefully designed illusions. One of the most unsettling families of effects are those where later events seem to reach back and reshape how earlier ones are experienced. In some experiments, for example, a brief flash is followed by other visual patterns. People report seeing the earlier flash in a way that depends on what happens afterward. It is as if the brain keeps a small buffer of the recent past open to editing, waiting to see what comes next before it finalizes what you think you saw. Something similar happens with moving objects and brief flashes presented together. When a moving bar and a single flash are arranged so that, in the outside world, they occur at the same place and time, people often perceive the moving bar as being slightly ahead. The brain has taken the recent motion, extrapolated where the bar will be, and then retroactively adjusted the perceived position so that the story remains smooth. The conscious impression you get is not a perfect reflection of what was out there. It is a best guess that has been quietly revised. These are not exotic glitches, but windows into everyday function. The brain is constantly integrating past and present data to maintain a stable world. It is willing to nudge the timing of sensations inside that integration window in order to avoid jarring contradictions. From your point of view, this feels like a fluid, continuous now. From the point of view of the underlying process, it is a set of patches applied to events that have already happened. Decision-making reveals a similar lag. In some well-known experiments, people are asked to make a simple movement, such as flexing a wrist, whenever they feel like it, while watching a clock and reporting the moment they become aware of their intention to move. At the same time, electrodes record brain activity. Again and again, a gradual build-up of neural activity appears before the reported time of the conscious intention. The brain begins preparing the movement, setting up the cascade that will lead to the flex, and only later does the feeling, "I have decided to do this now," arise. There is debate about exactly how to interpret such experiments. They do not prove that free will is an illusion in any simple sense, but they do strongly suggest that the conscious story you tell yourself about when you chose is not the first draft. It is a retrospective gloss. Your awareness arrives a beat late and then claims ownership over a process that has already started. You feel as if your conscious intention is the spark that ignites the action. In reality, the ignition has already occurred by the time you see the flame. Memory adds another layer. It does not just record the past, it revises it. Imagine watching a football match where a crucial goal is scored in the final moments. In the live moment, you may be uncertain about what will happen. The ball swings in, bodies collide, and then the stadium explodes. Later, watching the replay, you notice that the attacking team had been building pressure for minutes. With that knowledge in mind, you might say, "I had a feeling it was going to go in." The mind quietly imports your current understanding into your memory of your earlier state, smoothing over your previous uncertainty. This is a small example of a broader phenomenon often called hindsight bias. Once you know an outcome, it is difficult not to feel that you always sort of knew it would end that way. Your recollection of your earlier beliefs is colored by what you have learned since. In that sense, the past you remember is not the past as it was experienced, but the past as it looks from where you stand now. The brain has overwritten part of its own record to maintain a continuous, sensible narrative about you as a person who sees patterns, anticipates outcomes, makes sense of life. Put together, these elements paint a picture of consciousness as fundamentally backward-looking. Your sensory present is a smoothed summary of the immediate past. Your sense of deciding is a commentary on processes that are already underway. Your memory of what you used to believe is adjusted to fit your current understanding. At every scale, the you that feels like the center of experience is coming in after the fact, cleaning up and stitching together. Seen in that light, the impression that time is flowing could be the experience of this continual updating. Your stream of consciousness is like a line of text being written on the surface of a river that has already flowed by. The events are downstream. You are upstream, forever labeling what just passed as now, then watching it slide into then as the next update arrives. In a block universe picture, this becomes even more eerie. If all events exist as points in spacetime, then your conscious life is a series of those points in which the brain's reconstruction process is active. At each such point, that process is building a model of what has just happened in nearby regions of the block and calling that model the present. But there is no objective moving spotlight sweeping across the block marking out a true now. There is only this recurring act of late comprehension. That means that even if time as a dimension does not flow, something still does. It is this delay-ridden wave of awareness, always chasing, never catching, always commenting, never initiating. The moving circle of light you feel yourself to be is not touching the front edge of reality. It is tracing a path a little behind, illuminating scenes that are already written into the structure of the world. When you sit quietly and try to feel the present moment, what you are touching is already over. The breath you notice is already partly exhaled. The thought you become aware of has already formed. The realization that this is now is itself already sliding into memory. Consciousness lives there, in that narrow band of just gone events, forever mistaking that echo for the leading edge of time. If awareness is always a little late, patching together what has just happened, you might hope that at least the world outside has a single, clean tempo, one true ticking that everything obeys. But the moment you start comparing good clocks, even that comfort disappears. For most of human history, our timekeeping was rough. Sundials, water clocks, swinging pendulums, all of them smeared by weather, friction, and human error. They disagreed often, but we could blame that on imperfections in the devices. Somewhere, we assumed there was a pure background time they were failing to track. In the last century or so, we began to build clocks precise enough that this excuse stopped working. Atomic clocks do not tick because a gear moves or a weight swings. They use the rhythm of transitions inside atoms, tiny jumps between energy levels that are as regular as anything we know how to measure. When you line up such clocks side by side in a lab, you can make them agree to an astonishing degree. It is tempting to think, here, finally, is time itself being revealed. Then someone moves one of the clocks. In the early 1970s, two researchers, Joseph Hafele and Richard Keating, took a small fleet of atomic clocks onto commercial airplanes and flew them around the planet, once eastward and once westward, then compared them with similar clocks that had stayed on the ground. The prediction from Relativity was specific and unforgiving. The clocks on the planes would disagree with the ground clocks by tens of nanoseconds, and the direction of the trip would matter. Those numbers are tiny. A nanosecond is a billionth of a second. But with atomic clocks, this was well within reach of measurement. When the flying clocks returned, they did not match their siblings. The eastward trip, moving in the same direction as Earth's rotation, and therefore at higher speed relative to the planet's center, produced a small loss of time, on the order of a few dozen nanoseconds, relative to the ground. The westward trip, moving against the rotation, effectively slower relative to Earth's center, produced a gain of time, again on the order of a few hundred nanoseconds. The detailed results hovered close to the relativistic predictions, a predicted loss of about 40 nanoseconds versus a measured loss of about 59 for the eastward flight, and a predicted gain of about 275 nanoseconds versus a measured gain of about 273 for the westward flight. These differences are far too small to feel. No one stepped off the plane noticeably younger, but that is not the point. What matters is that there is no single answer to the question: how much time passed during the trip? The clock that stayed home says one thing. The clock that flew east says another. The clock that flew west says another still. None of them is malfunctioning. Each has simply followed a different path through space-time, under slightly different gravitational fields and velocities. And the structure of space-time itself assigns each path a different amount of elapsed proper time. On paper, this is exactly what relativity predicts. In space-time diagrams, each clock traces a world line, and the length of that line, measured in the appropriate four-dimensional way, gives its experienced duration. Those lengths need not match. The Hafele-Keating flights were not some strange exception. They were a demonstration that when you move clocks around, the universe really does let them disagree. You might file this away as an elegant laboratory curiosity, a tiny correction only specialists need to care about, but you are surrounded by a navigation system that depends on these disagreements every day. The GPS network, which lets your phone tell you where you are, relies on satellites orbiting Earth, each carrying precise atomic clocks. These satellites are high above the planet's surface, where gravity is weaker, and they are moving fast along their orbital paths. Both facts change how their clocks tick. General relativity says that being higher up, in a weaker gravitational field, should make a clock run faster than one on the ground. Special relativity says that moving quickly should make a clock run slower relative to one at rest. For GPS satellites, the gravitational effect wins. Taken together, the satellite clocks tend to run ahead of ground clocks by about several dozen microseconds per day, roughly a gain of about 45 microseconds from gravity and a loss of about 7 microseconds from motion, leaving a net advance of about 38 microseconds each day. A microsecond is a millionth of a second. It sounds harmless, but light travels hundreds of meters in that time. If the GPS system ignored relativity, these tiny daily gains would accumulate into position errors of many kilometers within a single day. Your map would think you were far from where you stood. To prevent this, the satellite clocks are deliberately set to tick at a slightly different rate before launch, so that, once in orbit, their sped up and slowed down rhythms combine into a rate that stays in step with clocks on Earth's surface. The system only works because engineers take seriously the idea that different paths through space-time come with different times. The same effect shows up on more intimate scales. Experiments with modern optical clocks, devices so precise that they would take longer than the age of the universe to drift by a single second if left alone, have measured gravitational time dilation over height differences comparable to a staircase. In work at the United States National Institute of Standards and Technology, two nearly identical clocks were placed at slightly different elevations, separated by only a few tens of centimeters. The higher clock, sitting in a fractionally weaker gravitational field, ticked measurably faster than the lower one. The difference was minuscule, but real. Stand on a step above someone else, and in principle, you age very slightly faster. These experiments sharpen the message. Time is not something that flows uniformly everywhere. It is a quantity tied to world lines and gravitational potentials. Ask, how much time has passed? And the universe replies, for whom and along which path? Even our official timekeeping has had to bend to this reality. International Atomic Time, the reference used to coordinate clocks across the globe, is not the reading of one privileged device. It is a weighted average of hundreds of atomic clocks in laboratories scattered over many countries, each corrected for its local conditions. When we say, this is the time, what we really mean is, this is the consensus we have agreed to construct from many disagreeing measurements. There is something quietly unsettling about this. We build clocks to escape the subjectivity of our inner sense of duration, to put numbers on hours and seconds that do not depend on mood or memory. Yet when our clocks become sharp enough, they reveal that even the world's own rhythms are not uniform. Move differently, and your time runs differently. Climb a mountain, and you will, by a tiny margin, live through more heartbeats than your twin who stays at sea level, even if you both die on the same agreed calendar day. From inside your experience, none of this announces itself. Your consciousness does not feel the nanoseconds you gain by flying westward, or the microsecond satellites accumulate as they circle overhead. The brain's integration window is far too wide, its narrative machinery far too blunt to register such subtle shifts. For you, time seems to move at one personal speed, occasionally distorted by boredom or fear, but otherwise smooth. From the outside, in the language of physics, time breaks apart into a family of local readings that can conflict without error. There is no single master second being dispensed to every clock in the cosmos. There are only intervals measured along paths, each shaped by motion and gravity, each internally consistent, all mutually at odds. When you put this beside the psychological picture, a brain that composes a delayed present from fragments of the recent past, the idea of a universal flowing time begins to look thin. Out there, clocks refuse to agree. In here, awareness never reaches the frontier. Whatever feels like a shared river carrying everything forward may be, instead, the rough meeting point of many imperfect rhythms. Atomic clocks drifting in their separate orbits, and a nervous system stitching their consequences into a story it can survive. If the most careful clocks and your own awareness both fail to agree on a single present, it is natural to ask a quieter, more unsettling question. How sure are you that the past leading up to this moment ever truly happened? This is where physics offers one of its strangest mirrors. Imagine, for a moment, an empty universe. Not truly empty, but settled into a kind of deep thermal rest. No galaxies, no stars, no planets, just a vast sea of particles spread out in a uniform, featureless way. This is what physicists call thermal equilibrium, a state where, on average, nothing much changes. Entropy is high. The system has wandered into one of the most probable, most disordered configurations it can reach. Even in such a calm sea, though, there are always tiny jitters. Nothing sits perfectly still. Particles bump, drift, collide. Over time, these random motions can, just by chance, create small pockets of order. A few particles might cluster together, then fall apart again. A brief, low-entropy arrangement appears, then dissolves. These random, temporary deviations from the average are called fluctuations. Most fluctuations are tiny, a slight clumping here, a brief gap there. But in principle, nothing stops larger, extremely improbable fluctuations from happening as well. Given enough time and enough space, the unlikely becomes inevitable, not because it is favored, but because there are so many chances for it to occur. This was the seed of an old idea. Perhaps the low-entropy, structured universe we see around us is itself the result of a colossal fluctuation out of an otherwise featureless, high-entropy background. Instead of starting in a special, ordered state and then relaxing toward disorder, maybe the universe spends almost all of its existence in disorder and only rarely throws up islands of structure like ours. At first glance, this seems perversely appealing. It turns the question back to statistics. No special initial condition, just a lottery that occasionally pays out big. But statistics can be unforgiving. If you take this picture seriously, you have to ask, what kind of fluctuation is the most probable one that could produce an observer like you? Here is where the thought experiment takes its sharpest turn. Consider two possibilities. In the first, an entire universe like the one you know fluctuates into existence. Galaxies forming, stars burning, planets cooling, life evolving, civilizations rising, building telescopes, writing essays about time. This is an enormous, finely tuned pocket of low entropy. To produce it as a random fluctuation from chaos would require an extraordinarily specific arrangement of unimaginably many particles. The odds are crushingly low. In the second possibility, only a single brain fluctuates into existence. No vast galaxy web, no long evolutionary history, just a brief, local structure in which matter happens, by chance, to arrange itself into a configuration physically identical to a human brain in a particular state. Same connections, same patterns of activity, same chemical impressions of memory. For that brain, from the inside, there is no difference. It would wake, if wake is the right word, already loaded with memories of a childhood, a family, a career, a set of beliefs about the world. It might have the sensation of sitting at a desk, reading about time, feeling mildly disturbed. It would be absolutely convinced that it had a long past. That kind of brain, born with a lifetime pre-installed, is what people mean by a Boltzmann brain. The phrase itself is just a shorthand. It refers to a hypothetical self-aware system that appears as a thermal fluctuation in a high-entropy universe, carrying within it the illusion of a long, coherent history. Now, compare the two possibilities from a statistical point of view. To make a full universe with billions of galaxies and billions of years of development, the fluctuation has to produce enormous amounts of structure and keep it around for a very long time. To make a single functioning brain in a bath of chaos, you still need something wildly improbable, but on a far smaller scale. Roughly speaking, it should be much easier, though still fantastically unlikely, to get one isolated brain than an entire cosmos with a history. If you live in a universe dominated by these random fluctuations, that raises a disturbing question. Which are you more likely to be? An ordinary observer who grew up in a large, low-entropy universe with a true past? Or a Boltzmann brain that just now assembled out of noise with a fake past written into its structure? If the second option is overwhelmingly more probable in that kind of cosmological model, then almost every conscious experience would belong to brains whose memories are lies. This is a philosophical nightmare. It does not just suggest that your personal memories might be unreliable in the usual, mundane ways. It suggests that the entire story of the universe, you seem to remember the Earth, the history books, the fossil record, the cosmic microwave background, all the evidence of a hot, dense origin and long expansion, could be nothing more than a consistent hallucination inside a brain that will dissolve back into chaos a second from now. Notice how deep this cut goes. All your usual methods for checking if something is real rely on comparing it with other parts of your experience. If you question your memory of a childhood trip, you can ask a sibling, look at old photos, reread messages. But in the Boltzmann brain scenario, all of those confirming traces are part of the same fluctuation. The sibling, the photos, the messages, the books in your room, the data in your scientific instruments, all of them are just additional internal states of this one brain. They tell a consistent story because the brain's configuration encodes them that way, not because there is an external reality that made them. From inside such a brain, there would be no empirical test you could perform to distinguish a genuine long history from a carefully crafted fake one. Every experiment you design, every result you read, every logical step you take happens within the same structure. It is like trying to climb out of a dream using only tools that the dream provides. This thought experiment does not say that you are a Boltzmann brain. It points instead to a constraint on any physical theory that tries to explain the universe in terms of random fluctuations in a high-entropy background. If such a theory predicts that almost all observers are short-lived fluctuation brains with illusory pasts, and yet you seem to inhabit a world full of stable structure and shared history, then something about that theory is wrong or incomplete. Cosmologists use this as a sanity check. Acceptable models should not be dominated, in probability, by Boltzmann brains. Still, even if most physicists treat Boltzmann brains as a sign of a bad cosmology rather than as an actual description of our situation, the idea leaves a residue. It shows how tightly our sense of time is entangled with trust in the structure around us. You believe in a real past, not just because you remember it, but because the world is thick with records that appear to line up. Tree rings, ice cores, worn stones, geological layers, fossils, documents, photons that have been traveling through space for billions of years. These are all physical traces of lower entropy configurations, leading to higher entropy ones. They form a web of correlations that would be fantastically difficult to fake. In ordinary life, you rarely think of these as proofs of time. They are just background. But they are what distinguish a universe with a genuine history from a brain with injected memories. In a world that has truly evolved from a low-entropy beginning, the records of the past are not only in your head, they are embedded in the environment in diverse, redundant ways. If you lost all memory tomorrow, the rocks, the stars, the fossils, the archives would still be there. The universe would still carry a story that could, in principle, be reconstructed. The Boltzmann brain picture strips all of that away. It leaves only one copy of the story in one fragile substrate for one instant. It is a perfect example of a fake past, a complete narrative with no external support. There is another, softer way this idea reaches into everyday thought. You have already seen that memory is unreliable, that hindsight reshapes your sense of what you used to believe, that consciousness itself lags and edits. In a small way, you are always living in a world where the past you recall is not exactly the past that happened. Your brain alters the story with each retelling. Connections are strengthened, details are dropped, meanings are revised. From that angle, the Boltzmann brain problem is like an extreme version of something that is already true at a modest scale. At what point does a reconstructed or distorted memory become a kind of fake past? How much editing can occur before the story you tell yourself stops being a record and becomes a myth? The universe, at least as physics describes it, offers a counterweight. It does not rely on your personal narrative. The direction of entropy, the scars in matter, the patterns of radiation all bear witness to a long chain of events that do not care what you remember. The fact that these independent traces cohere is one of the strongest reasons to reject a world dominated by Boltzmann brains. It is also a quiet reminder of how small your own story is compared with the vast, impersonal history that made it possible. In a block universe picture, both possibilities, a genuine long history and a fake instantaneous one, are just different patterns in the four-dimensional structure. One block contains a rich, extended strand of low to high entropy evolution, with many observers embedded in it, each with their own partial records. The other block contains a slender filament, a brief appearance of a single organized brain amid chaos, with internal configurations that mimic an entire lifetime. Both blocks exist. The difference is not metaphysical. It is statistical and structural. How much order? How much redundancy? How much of the pattern lies outside the observer's own head? Thinking about Boltzmann brains will not tell you what time is. It does something quieter. It exposes how much your confidence in a flowing past depends on the match between your memories and the world's records, and how quickly that confidence starts to shake when you imagine those records vanishing. It also prepares a further step. If the universe does have a real, extended history, and if time does not flow in the way it feels to you, then perhaps the stability you seek does not come from clinging to a moving river of moments. It comes from seeing yourself as one small knot in a vast tapestry of correlations, most of which exist whether or not you remember them. In that picture, a fake past is one without such knots, stretching beyond a single mind. A real past is one where the story of time is written into matter itself, not just whispered in your thoughts. If a real past is the one written into matter and not just into a single mind, it is natural to wonder what the story looks like from any vantage that is not trapped in your particular line through it. Philosophy and spirituality have been circling that question for a very long time. Imagine, first, a simple picture. A river winds through a valley, turning and splitting, cutting new paths as it goes. From within the water, all you can feel is current and turbulence. There is only the next bend, the next rock, the next stretch of calm. From a hill above, the same river looks different. You see the source, the distant mouth, the places where it slows and narrows. all at once. You can trace the whole course with your eyes without moving your feet. Many traditions, without sharing the same language or metaphysics, gesture toward a kind of hilltop view of time. Not necessarily a god, not even a person, but some way of holding the pattern of causes and effects as a single picture rather than as a sequence of surprises. In some strands of thought that speak of karma, every action leaves a trace, every intention plants a seed, and these seeds ripen when conditions align. The point is not reward or punishment in a simple sense, it is interconnection. In this view, what you call the present is a crossing point of many old causes and many not yet visible consequences. All of them are, in a way, coexisting as lines of dependency. A sufficiently clear mind, it is said, could see this web, not just in its local tangle but as an ordered whole. You can translate that into a more secular picture. Think of every event as a node in a vast network. From each node, arrows stretch backward to the conditions that made it possible and forward to the events it will help bring about. The web exists as one structure. What you call past, present, and future are just the portions of this web that you can currently reconstruct, directly perceive, or only infer. A being who could see the entire network at once would see all three at the same time, not as flowing, but as related. Western philosophy has its own ways of pointing at this. A thinker like Augustine, reflecting on time many centuries ago, noticed something simple and difficult. When nobody asks him what time is, he feels he knows. When he has to explain it, it slips away. So he turns inward. The past, he says, exists as memory. The future exists as expectation. The present exists as attention. The three times, in this sense, live in the mind rather than in the world as independent substances. That observation is closer to modern neuroscience than he could have known. Your brain does, in fact, hold on to traces of what has happened, project simulations of what might happen, and focus its limited resources on a narrow window of what seems to be happening now. The three modes are not three parts of an external timeline. They are three operations applied to the same underlying reality. Reminding, anticipating, noticing. Seen this way, the idea that past, present, and future coexist stops being mystical and becomes almost mundane. They coexist as states of your nervous system. At any given moment, you are carrying memories, running forecasts, and attending to a slice of sensory and internal data. They overlap and compete. Sometimes memory dominates, and you are lost in old scenes. Sometimes prediction dominates, and you live in imagined futures. Sometimes attention thickens, and the sense of external now becomes sharp, while the other two recede. Spiritual practices often aim, quite explicitly, at tilting this balance. Picture a young student, worn down by regret and anxiety, asking a meditation teacher how to escape suffering. The student lists mistakes that cannot be undone, opportunities that feel lost, possible disasters that feel inevitable. After listening, the teacher does not offer comfort about the past or guarantees about the future. Instead, they give a simple, difficult instruction. Look directly at what is happening. Here, in this breathing, in this sensation, in this posture, not to deny the past or ignore the future, but to see how much of your pain is generated by attachment to them. On the surface, this can sound like a rejection of time, a claim that only an eternal now is real. But if you look carefully, it is less about metaphysics and more about attention. The flow of time, as you ordinarily experience it, is built from constant shuttling between remembered scenes and imagined ones. You rarely rest in the thin band of immediate experience. When you do, the narrative about a self being pulled along by time loosens slightly. Moments stop feeling like units in a race and become textures in a field. Philosophers of time argue over whether the future is as real as the past, whether only the present exists, whether all events coexist in a tenseless way. Some defend a moving spotlight, sweeping along the timeline, turning mere possibilities into realities. Others defend a static block in which there is no intrinsic flow, only relations. What is interesting, for our purposes, is how often contemplative reports echo, in different language, the idea that the deep structure of reality is not captured by the way we ordinarily imagine time passing. Someone who has spent years in introspective practice might say that when the mind quiets, the sense of a hard boundary between past, present, and future thins. Memories arise and dissolve like other sensations. Hopes and fears about what is to come appear as images and thoughts, not as messages from a fixed destiny. The present is not a knife edge dividing two realms. It is a kind of open field in which traces of what has been and sketches of what may be appear and vanish. The three times, here again, coexist in one awareness. You can read this as a psychological adjustment only. The brain is changing its weighting of memory, prediction, and attention. Or you can read it as a partial glimpse of a more fundamental fact, that what we call time is as much a structure of mind as of world. Either way, something converges. Philosophers, contemplatives, and physicists all discover that our naive image of time as a single line being laid down, one point after another, is too simple. Physics strips away the idea of a universal present and replaces it with spacetime, a four-dimensional structure in which all events have their place. Philosophy notices that the distinction between was, is, and will be may not live out there, but in the way we talk and think. Spiritual traditions notice that suffering is tightly tied to clinging to what has passed or to what has not yet come, and that changing one's relationship to these mental constructions changes the quality of experience, even if nothing external moves. None of this requires you to accept any particular doctrine. You can treat stories about beings who see all karma or gods who hold all times in a single gaze as metaphors for the possibility of stepping back from your own narrow sense of flow. You can treat talk of an eternal now as a poetic way to describe a less entangled relationship with memory and anticipation. You can treat the block universe as a model that captures certain regularities of physics without assuming it is the final word on reality. What matters, in this context, is the pattern. Very different lines of inquiry keep pointing toward a similar intuition. The river of time you feel is not simply imposed on you from the outside. It is entangled with how you construct self and world. When that construction shifts, your sense of time can shift dramatically without any need for the cosmos to change its laws. Consider a simple exercise. You are sitting alone in a room. Your phone is in another space, buzzing with unread messages. Your mind drifts to them. In those moments, your experience timeline stretches toward an imagined near future in which you open the screen, see certain words, feel certain reactions. You are not in that scene, but part of your awareness is already there. The present feels thin, like a waiting room, because most of your attention is invested in a picture that does not yet have external support. If, for a brief span, you bring your attention back to the weight of your body on the chair, the sound of air moving, the subtle visual textures around you, nothing about physical time has changed. The same clocks are ticking, the same entropy gradients are unfolding. But the felt quality of time has changed. It is less about getting somewhere and more about being with what is occurring. The future still exists as a set of possibilities in your mind, but it no longer dominates the frame. At the other end of the spectrum, think of someone whose mind is locked onto a single event in the past, a loss, a betrayal, a humiliation. For them, hours and days may be filled with relived scenes. The past occupies much of their present awareness. Again, nothing in the external flow has reversed. The direction in which entropy increases has not changed. But their inner allocation of attention has created a kind of private time loop. The past lives now as constantly refreshed memory. Seen through these lenses, the statement that the three times coexist can be read in at least three ways. In physics, as different regions of space-time that all belong to one geometric whole. In philosophy, as different modes of consciousness applied to one reality. In contemplative practice, as different kinds of mental content appearing together in the field of awareness. None of these requires a flowing time that carries you like a passenger. All of them see you as an active participant in how time is experienced. You might expect such reflections to offer comfort, to promise escape from anxiety or regret. They do not automatically. Realizing that your sense of being pushed along by time is, in part, a construction does not make loss hurt less. It does not bring back missed chances or erase coming risks. If anything, it can make things feel more fragile. There is no guarantee that the universe has some hidden narrative arc in which everything will make sense. What it does offer is a different kind of humility. If time is not simply a river out there, but also a pattern you help draw through memory, prediction, and attention, then your experience of being swept away is not the whole story. There is space, however small, to notice the drawing as it happens, to see how a remembered scene grips you, to see how an imagined future colonizes your present, to see how the insistence that time is running out is, at least partly, a sentence arising in a brain, not an objective broadcast from the cosmos. At the point where philosophy and spirituality meet, the message is not that time is an illusion and nothing matters. It is almost the opposite. The patterns of cause and effect that have led to this moment are real enough to hurt and to heal. The choices you make now will become part of the web that shapes other minds and other moments. But the way you stand inside that web, the way you feel its currents, is not fixed. The flow you feel can be examined, questioned, and sometimes gently altered, even if the underlying structure of events remains what it is. In that sense, when people from different traditions say that past, present, and future coexist, they may be pointing, in their own ways, to this layered situation. There is the world as physics traces it, indifferent to your narratives. There is the world as your concepts and languages cut it, dividing it into before and after. And there is the world as your awareness moves through it, pulling certain threads into a story called a life. Time lives in all three at once. Where it seems to flow most strongly may tell you more about how you are looking than about what the universe is doing. If the way you stand inside time can shift without the universe changing its laws, then the question stops being, "What is time doing to me?" and becomes something closer to, "What am I doing inside whatever this is?" If time does not flow, then whatever moves has to be you. The block picture is a hard one to hold in your mind. A four-dimensional spacetime, already there, with every event fixed in its place. Your birth, your first memory, the moment you are living right now, and the moment of your death, all just different points along one continuous line. No new moments being manufactured, no old ones being erased. Just a vast structure in which you occupy one coordinate after another. Inside that picture, the intuition that I am moving forward becomes slippery. Forward relative to what? If all events are equally part of the block, then the difference between past and future is not that one exists and the other does not. It is that you have already been at some parts of your world line and you have not yet been at others. Think again of a book, not as a metaphor for the universe this time, but as a metaphor for you. Your life, in this view, is not a point crawling along a line. It is a thick, four-dimensional shape, sometimes called a world tube. At each slice through space-time, there is a version of you, a child, an adolescent, an adult, an old person, each with a different body, a different brain state, a different set of memories. Taken together, these are not separate entities. They are one extended object. From outside the story, if there were such a vantage, there would be no need for anything to move. That world tube simply is. From inside, though, there is a peculiar kind of motion. At one point on the tube, the brain state includes memories of earlier points and expectations of later ones. At another point, those memories and expectations have changed. What you call I is this pattern of self-reference, this looping of a brain back onto earlier slices of its own history and forward into imagined ones. So, one way of answering the question is to say, nothing moves in spacetime. Movement is already built into the geometry, but there is a sense in which your conscious perspective moves along your own world line, inhabiting now this slice, now the next. The moving thing, if you insist on one, is not time, it is the locus of awareness. That answer is neat, but it hides a problem. What exactly is this locus of awareness? In a physical brain, there is no single point that looks like the seat of a self. There is no tiny witness perched behind your eyes. There are billions of neurons exchanging signals, generating patterns of activity that correlate with perception, memory, emotion, action. The continuity of you is a story that these patterns tell about themselves. In that sense, what moves is not a little glowing soul crossing tick marks on a cosmic ruler. What moves is a story about a self, constantly updated as new experiences are woven into the web of memory and older ones are reweighted or pruned. Every time the brain reactivates a pattern, it not only recalls but slightly rewrites it. Every time it simulates a possible future, it also subtly reshapes what you take yourself to be capable of. This is easier to see at the edges. After a stroke, a person may lose access to whole regions of memory or bodily sensation. After a traumatic event, they may develop an entirely new understanding of who they are and what matters. After years of practice, they may find their inner narration quieted, the sense of a solid, unchanging self loosened. In each case, the physical processes in the brain have altered the pattern. The story has changed. The I that moves from moment to moment is this mutable, emergent pattern, not a fixed entity. If time does not flow, the pattern still does. It is encoded differently at different points along your world line. Early slices include fewer memories, simpler expectations, different habits. Later slices include more, or at least different, records and forecasts. The thread that ties them together is continuity of structure, not some extra substance that travels from one slice to the next carrying identity like luggage. But from the inside, that is not how it feels. From the inside, it feels as if there is a single subject sitting behind your eyes, watching the world change. You wake, you remember yesterday, you anticipate tomorrow. The body is older, the circumstances have shifted, but the watcher feels the same. Many contemplative traditions point out that this feeling of a constant watcher is itself a construction. When you look closely, what you find are sensations, thoughts, and moods arising and fading, each with its own flavor. The sense of a stable I is one more of those, a recurring motif rather than a separate entity. If you accept that, the movement becomes more abstract. What moves is not an object, it is a frame of reference. At one moment, the frame is centered on this configuration of brain and body, with these memories and predictions. At the next, the frame has shifted slightly because the configuration has changed. The block universe contains all those configurations. The motion is the succession of frames that claim ownership of them. Another way to see it is to imagine the block not as something static, but as something you are gradually uncovering. You cannot change which events exist. If the block picture is right, every choice you will ever make is already part of the structure. What you can change is which parts of the block are lit up by understanding, which connections you recognize, which patterns you fail to see. In that sense, what moves is knowledge. Ignorance gives way, slowly and incompletely, to insight. Misunderstandings fall away, replaced by different misunderstandings. The events remain what they are. Your relationship to them shifts. Take a simple memory. There is an evening from years ago that used to hurt every time you thought of it. Perhaps an argument, a humiliation, a moment of cowardice. In the block, that event is fixed. The argument happened. The words were said. The expressions were made. Nothing about that slice changes. What can change is the meaning you assign it. Over time, you might come to see it as a turning point, a catalyst, or simply as something that happened to someone you no longer quite are. The emotional weight changes. The way it fits into your story changes. That is movement. Not in the event, but in the narrative that threads through events. Now zoom out. The universe as a whole has its own version of this. Physical processes, from the fusion in stars to the biology of brains, create and destroy structures that can carry information. Life emerges, evolves, develops nervous systems that can model their surroundings and themselves. With those models come new kinds of motion. Not just particles shifting in space, but representations shifting in minds. A predator learning the habits of its prey. A child learning to read. A scientist revising a theory. These are motions in the space of models, not directly in the space of matter. If time does not flow, these two are just patterns in the block. But they are the kind of patterns that give rise to a sense of flow. A brain that models itself as located at a moving present will report that time is passing, even if, at the most fundamental level, the relations between events are tenseless. The insistence, I was, I am, I will be, is what it feels like, from the inside, for such a pattern to exist. This brings us to a more uncomfortable question. If what moves is the self-model, and that model is continually rewritten, how firm is your grip on being one continuing person at all? Are you truly the same you who walked into a classroom many years ago, or loved someone fiercely and then left, or said something you regret? The law and everyday morality usually treat identity as simple continuity of body. Physics treats identity as continuity of world line. Psychology treats it as continuity of memory and character. Each answer works in its own domain. None fully captures the vivid, fragile sense of me that time seems to carry. In a non-flowing time, perhaps the best you can say is that you are a particular arc through a space of possible experiences, stitched together by overlapping memory and habit. Movement is the appearance of new overlaps. When an event occurs, it adds to the structure of the brain. Future brain states will contain traces of it. That inclusion links earlier and later slices into a chain. The chain is not inevitable in a logical sense. Many other chains could have existed, but in the block picture, this is the one that does. Does that make you a prisoner of a fixed script? It depends on what you mean by prisoner. If you imagine freedom as the ability to have done otherwise in some abstract, detached way, then yes, a fully fixed block seems to leave little room. But if you imagine freedom as the capacity to act according to who you are, with awareness, within the constraints of a world you did not choose, then the block is less threatening. The structure includes not only your actions, but the processes by which you deliberate, hesitate, reconsider, and change. From outside, these are just more patterns. From inside, they matter. When you stand at a crossroads, feeling pulled in two directions, you are experiencing, in real time, the meeting of many streams of cause: upbringing, temperament, current mood, imagined futures, ethical commitments. The path you eventually take is, in the block, already part of the structure. But the struggle you feel in arriving there, the care you bring to it, the fact that you know it matters, those are also part of the structure. They are not illusions, simply because they are included rather than generated on the fly. So if time does not flow, who moves? A modest answer is patterns of matter and energy that model themselves as moving. Among those patterns, certain ones, brains like yours, generate a particularly strong sense of continuity and agency. They thread events into a story, and in doing so, create the feeling of being carried along. A harsher answer is, nothing moves in the way you imagine. There is no little self riding a river. There is only a static tapestry in which some threads are shaped such that, at certain points, they include the belief, I am moving forward. That belief is not a window onto an external flow. It is one of the motifs the tapestry happens to contain. Between those two answers, there is a narrow ledge on which you actually live. You experience yourself as moving. You experience your choices as mattering. You experience loss and joy as changes, not as timeless facts. Physics may tell you that. At a certain level of description, time is just another dimension, and nothing flows. Philosophy may tell you that the self is a construction, None of that erases what it is like to be this particular construction, at this particular point in its arc. If anything, it makes that experience more fragile, and maybe more honest. The movement you feel is not guaranteed, not backed by a cosmic river. It is a local, contingent pattern in a universe that might have been otherwise. To say that time does not flow is not to say that nothing is happening. It is to say that whatever is happening includes, as one of its features, a creature that looks out, feels itself moving, and asks why. If the movement you feel is a local pattern in a universe that might have been otherwise, then the question is no longer whether time is dragging you somewhere, but how you stand inside the path that is already yours. What changes if time stops flowing? Start with regret, because that is often where the mind goes first, when it hears that the past might still, in some sense, exist. If every moment of your life is a fixed point in a four-dimensional structure, then every mistake is frozen there too. The words you wish you had not said, the decision you wish you had not made, the person you did not become. It is tempting to think that this makes regret heavier, that you are condemned to an eternity of having done what you did. But regret has always been about something fixed. Even in the old picture, where time was a river and the past vanished behind you, you could not go back and edit a scene. What changes in the block view is not the stubbornness of what happened, but the way you understand your position relative to it. The regret is happening in a different slice, carried by a different version of you. That version has access to more of the story. It may be capable of holding the earlier self with more clarity, even with some compassion, without confusing that compassion for a magical undoing. You can think of it as standing at a later page in a book, looking back at an earlier chapter. The text on that page will never change, but your reading of it does. The kind of person you are when you reread it does. In a universe where time does not flow, that distinction becomes sharp. The only thing you can move is your relationship to what is already written. The same is true of anxiety. Much of your fear about the future rests on the assumption that time is an open road stretching ahead, where you are responsible for steering away from disaster. If you lean too hard into the block picture, you might feel the opposite, that every outcome is already there, and that your worry is both powerless and pointless. Neither extreme is quite right. Even if the structure of events is fixed in some timeless sense, you do not know that structure. What you live inside is uncertainty. The future as you experience it is a fan of possibilities shaped by what you currently understand. When you worry, you are not glimpsing destiny. You are rehearsing one of many internally generated scenes. The fact that one of those scenes will eventually match what happens does not give today's anxiety the status of prophecy. It simply means that from a long enough distance, some fragment of your fear will align with some region of the block, and all the others will not. Taking seriously the idea that time does not flow can, paradoxically, make your imagination feel more honest. The future is not a single glowing path you are failing to find. It is a set of models your brain is throwing onto a space it does not yet have information about. Their purpose is not to reveal the one true outcome, but to help you act in the present with some grasp of risk and consequence. You can use them without worshipping them. Responsibility looks different too. In a flowing time, it is easy to tell yourself that you are being pushed from behind by a solid past and pulled from ahead by an empty future. Responsibility becomes a matter of trying not to be swept away. In a non-flowing time, you are less a leaf in a current and more a particular curve in a diagram. Your choices are not free in the sense of hovering outside reality, but they are still the places where the pattern tightens, where the lines of cause and effect narrow through the filter of what you do. You can picture all of the events that count as your life, as a region of the block bounded by your birth and your death. Within that region, certain segments stand out, moments where you paused instead of reacting, moments where you turned towards someone instead of away, moments where you went with the easiest impulse, and moments where you did the opposite. Those moments are not outside the block, bending it. They are part of what the block is. When you stand in one of them, you do not yet know which way it will go. That not knowing is not an illusion. It is the subjective face of a structure that, viewed from outside your line, is already complete. In daily life, none of this gives you a new tool, a secret power. You still have to decide whether to answer a message, whether to apologize, whether to walk away. The physics does not tell you which move is right. What it might do is soften a certain kind of fatalism. If time does not flow, then you are not being dragged into a pre-written future. You are the pre-written future, happening. From the inside, that includes your hesitation, your reflection, your attempts to do better than before. There is also the way you relate to the present. That thin, thick band of constructed now. Your brain is always building from delayed signals. Once you know that awareness is perpetually late, that it lives in a moving average of the recent past, you can stop demanding that it be a perfect dashboard. It is not supposed to be. It is a survival tool. It gives you a world that is coherent enough to act in. Outside the lab, you do not need nanosecond precision. You need a stable stage on which to love, to work, to fail, to laugh. This can be oddly calming. When you catch yourself trying to live on the razor edge of the present, terrified of missing it, you can remember, there is no razor edge. There is a sliding window, a best effort. Every breath you notice has already started. Every sound you hear has already vibrated the air. Every thought you watch has already formed. You are always a little late to your own life, and that has always been enough. What about meaning? If the universe is a block, indifferent and complete, does anything you do matter? From the perspective of the whole, probably not in the way you were taught as a child, the block will not be improved or damaged by your individual successes and failures. The galaxies will not applaud. Entropy will not slow out of respect. Meaning, in this view, is local and relational. It is not something poured into events from the outside. It is something that emerges when certain structures in the block brains, communities, cultures assign value to certain patterns rather than others. A conversation that averts a suicide. A gesture that repairs a friendship. A sentence that shifts how someone understands themselves. These are not grand cosmic acts. They are small configurations of matter and information that matter to the beings involved. Time not flowing does not erase that. If anything, it underscores how precious such configurations are. They are not raw possibilities waiting to be realized. They are fragile regions in a vast space of mostly indifferent arrangements. When you inhabit one, you are not writing it into existence from nothing. You are inhabiting the part of the block in which that kindness, that cruelty, that courage or failure exists. To know that it could have been otherwise in some larger sense does not change the fact that, here, it is what it is. So, how might you live differently with all of this in mind? You might be a little less impressed by your own sense that time is rushing or dragging. When you feel that a year has vanished or that a day will not end, you can recognize that as a statement about memory and attention, not about a substance called time thinning or thickening. That recognition does not dissolve boredom or grief, but it keeps you from mistaking mood for physics. You might loosen your grip on narratives of being behind in life. That idea assumes that there is a proper schedule, a shared tempo, and that you have fallen out of step. In the block view, there is only your particular curve through space-time, with its particular sequence of events. The comparison to others is a psychological habit, not an objective fact. You can still want things, still work toward them. But the sense of having missed some universal deadline starts to look thin. You might relate differently to anticipation. Instead of treating your imagined futures as previews of a fixed outcome, you might see them as tools and stories. When they paralyze you, you can question them. When they help you prepare, you can use them without believing they reveal the truth. The only slice of the block you ever actually touch is the one you are currently inhabiting, with the resources and limitations you actually have. And you might treat the present not as a sacred point you are always failing to reach, but as a kind of workshop where past and future are being woven into something livable. The person you were is already fixed. The person you will be is, in some sense, already fixed too. But right now, in this moving window of reconstruction, you are the place where they meet. If time does not flow, only we do. then the most honest response is not to chase some impossible stillness or to surrender to some cold determinism. It is to recognize how strange it is to be a creature that tells itself a story of motion inside a world that may, at its deepest level, simply be. You do not have to believe any of this. You can treat it as a thought experiment, a lens you pick up for a while and then set down. But if something in it shifts the way you feel the next hour, or the way you remember the previous year, then this block of words has already done its work. And if you want to keep walking this question of what moves when time does not, you can stay, listen to the next story, and let us keep taking apart the obvious together.